Alright, dude, you have got to stop with the long recipes.
Huh?
Give the people what they want. More shorter weeknight recipes. Ain't nobody trying to set aside 3 days to make a cake or whatever. Okay, then what sort of weeknight recipes did you have in mind? I don't know, ramen? You can't make ramen on a weeknight. Yes I can. In fact, I do it every weeknight. Yeah, that's not what I meant. Just for that, I'm doing another overnighter.
Most people I know are fans of ramen. There's a lot of right ways to do it and also a lot of perceived wrong ways to do it. But I really just think it's an art project for you to make your own, adding whatever flavors from whatever cultures you like. And in my case, I was craving Korean food like I pretty much always am. So I wanted to make a ramen with different types of Korean flavors, and this is what I came up with. It's a dashi stock base with doenjang and miso, and it's heavily flavored by the bulgogi marinated ground pork and just a few other toppings that I like. So this is not meant to be as time consuming as something like tonkotsu ramen, but it also does take a little bit of time. I'm starting my process the day before. I'm going to start with my pork marinade, which is basically just the marinade from my bulgogi video from last year. I'm going to breeze through it. I start with my food processor. I add 1 small onion. All I have is a red onion here, but usually I use yellow. 5 cloves of garlic with the butts chopped off. And this is usually where I would add a half of a Korean pear from the reserves I keep in my freezer. But I'm all out, and the Korean market didn't have any either. You could easily sub with just a regular apple or pear, but I'll show you a hack that I think also works. It's just a small canister of applesauce. This does have some additives besides just processed apple, but we're just looking for the sweetness and the enzymes in the fruit to help tenderize the meat, which ground meat doesn't really need to be tenderized anymore, but the sweetness will help keep the flavor traditional. I forgot to add ginger, but you can also add a little bit of that here. I process that up into a paste and then add to a bowl. Then I'll add a couple tablespoons of soy sauce and 1 tablespoon of dark soy sauce, a teaspoon of sesame oil and an optional tablespoon of gochujang, a couple of tablespoons each of brown sugar and corn syrup. You could use honey instead of the syrup, a good few cranks of black pepper, and then 1 scallion thinly sliced. Give that a mix and then taste for seasoning, or just because it tastes good. And then I'm just adding in a pound of ground pork. I have a ton in my freezer from a pork shoulder that I ground up myself, but really any meat would work here. You could use ground chicken. I usually use thinly sliced ribeye, but some pork belly would work as well, anything. I just mix with my hand until it's homogeneous and let that marinate overnight. This could be fine marinating for like 30 minutes, but I have something else that I'm going to marinate overnight, and that's going to be Mayak gyeran, or Korean drug eggs. This is similar to a basic ramen egg, which is just a marinated egg that people add to ramen. It's just got a few more flavors, and Koreans typically eat this with rice or by itself. I just thought it would go perfect with a Korean flavored ramen. So I'm just carefully adding 4 eggs to boiling water and letting that go for 6.5 minutes. And then afterwards, those get immediately dunked into some ice water to stop the cooking. After a couple minutes, I just put this under some running water and peel them. Meanwhile, I'm mixing together the marinade, starting with 3 tablespoons of soy sauce and 1 tablespoon of dark soy sauce for extra color, a 1/4 cup of water for extra volume, and then 2 tablespoons of white vinegar, 3 tablespoons of corn syrup, and then 4 cloves of garlic, which are roughly minced. Also 1 scallion that's thinly sliced. And then these eggs are meant to be spicy, so I'm including some peppers here. And traditional here would be gochu peppers, but I can never find those fresh around me. I've only had them sent to me once. So I'm just grabbing a couple of each jalapeños and Thai chilies that I have. Mixing the red and green colors can make this a little more visually appealing. I think any fresh pepper would work in this case, so go crazy. Those are thinly sliced and added in, and then I'm mixing everything together. Add in those eggs and roll them around to get color all around them. And the age-old trick to help these marinate evenly is to place a napkin on top of them and press it onto them. This keeps the liquid in contact with them, even though it seems a little gross. That gets sealed up and then placed in the fridge. But then I realized I forgot to add the roasted sesame seeds to the marinade, so I'm fixing that real quick. But this is definitely best marinated overnight if you can. It produces a beautifully jammy egg with all that dark color on the outside, which is all the flavor penetrating in. These are called drug eggs because they're so addicting. Now my favorite part about this is, aside from the marinating overnight, this ramen doesn't take long at all to come together. Typically you could start with an aromatic base and then add some sort of stock and make the ramen that way, but we have all of our aromatics inside of the pork already. So I'm starting by getting some oil into my Dutch oven over medium heat. And then I'm adding all of my ground pork into an even layer on the bottom. I'm doing this over medium heat because I don't want any of the sugars or anything inside of the marinade to burn, but I do want to get some browning on the meat itself. So I'm letting that sit untouched for about 10 minutes. It's going to develop a little bit of color on the bottom, which will bring a lot of flavor. At that point, I'll start to agitate it and stir it around so the meat gets cooked evenly. This will take a good bit of time and patience because you don't just want to take the meat to a gray stage. Like, I don't just want to stop when it's cooked through, but I want to take it further and let it brown. Especially on ground meat, that Maillard reaction is what a lot of people miss out on. So a lot of the waters from inside the marinade will keep boiling off, and then once you're done with that, it'll start to fry. Over the course of, I'd say like 20 more minutes, you're just stirring this around and making sure nothing is sticking to the bottom and burning. When most of the water boils out, you'll see a fond start to develop on the bottom. That's when you know you're close. I'm just continuing to stir to get more brown color on the meat. And before that fond burns, I'm going to take all this meat out so I can deglaze it. Just remember, the closer you get to burning it without actually burning it, the better the flavor is going to be. So this next part is up to you. You can deglaze this with whatever liquid you like. I would say some sort of stock is best. I'm using some dashi stock that I had frozen already, which Korean dashi stock is made with anchovies, but I make a more Japanese style one because it's just easier. I had this left over from my kimchi jjigae video. Simply put, it's just 6 cups of water and then 1 or 2 sheets of kombu. I add a couple shiitake mushrooms for extra flavor. I let that soak for an hour if I can, and then put that over heat until it starts simmering but not boiling. At that point, I add in a pack or 2 of bonito flakes. This will bring the fish flavor, which is the flavor of this stock. That soaks off heat for 5 minutes to steep, and then I'm just straining everything out through a coffee filter. If you don't want to do all this, you can just add some hondashi to water and it works almost the same. I'm only adding a little bit of this at first, so just a couple of cubes because this is frozen. I always do this when I'm deglazing so I can still see the bottom of the pot and it doesn't get buried. I want to first make sure I'm scraping off everything on the bottom before adding all the liquid in. So I didn't have the full 6 cups of dashi here, so I'm just supplementing with some water, and then I'm adding a little bit of better than bouillon chicken paste. So again, you can make this base whatever you want, but I am bringing all that to a boil, and then I'm going to kill the heat. We're going to add in 2 types of soybean paste here, one Korean and one Japanese. Korean soybean paste is called doenjang, and it's used in a lot of soups and stews. It's a beautiful fermented salty flavor, and Japanese soybean paste is called miso. A lot of you are familiar with this from miso soup. It's got a similar but also different flavor, and I think combining them was a really good idea. The best way to do this is through a sieve, so you can make sure you're dissolving all the paste that you add. That way you don't have to chase the paste around the pot and find what you're trying to dissolve. I'm starting with the 2 tablespoons of doenjang, and there are actually some really thick chunks of soybeans still in here, so I'm going to discard those. And I'm doing the same thing with 1 tablespoon of miso paste. These lose a lot of their flavor if you boil them, so that's why we already killed the heat at this point. I'm just finishing by seasoning to taste with some soy sauce and sesame oil. You could add some fish sauce if you want, but this stuff is already tasting amazing, so we can start to build our ramen. I had 1 more frozen puck of homemade ramen noodles from my tonkotsu video last year, but if you don't have that, it's fine. You can buy these ramen noodles from Asian markets. I use them all the time and they come out really great. So I'm adding the fresh noodles to a warm bowl. A good tip is to warm this bowl in the microwave for a little bit so it keeps the ramen warm. I'm adding generous heaps of the homemade quick broth. I use my chopsticks to kind of even out these noodles and make a little bed so you can still see them. And again, this is your own art project, so you can get creative and top it with whatever you like. I'm adding generous heaps of that sweet, flavorful ground pork. And then I love enoki mushrooms, so I'm adding a bunch of those. All I did was trim off the root end and then break these into 4 servings. I got a lot of oil into a pan over low heat and just added these. I covered them and let them sit for 10 minutes to steam, but also to brown the bottom. Then I removed the cover and flipped these and then just browned them on the other side until they were done. Finished with a pinch of salt, and these are perfect to top a ramen. I'm adding 1 of my Mayak gyeran eggs, and then I also made a crispy onion topping, which is really simple. I just had a few sliced onions in my fridge, so I added that to some room temperature oil. I brought that up to high heat, and these started to brown, and I took them out when they were brown. Finished with salt, and these are a nice snack for any type of meal. Lastly, some chopped scallion, some roasted sesame seeds, and then a couple sheets of nori or kim. I wanted to add bamboo shoots, but I forgot to get those. But this is looking amazing. It really didn't take a whole lot of work. I mean, it's not the easiest weeknight meal, but it's not something that takes up days of your time. I think it celebrates Korean flavors really well with some Japanese twists in there. It was super cold in my house when I was making this, so this was the perfect meal to have. I'm ready to taste test.
Prince, can I have a seat? You can literally go so many places with just the canvas of ramen. I don't really think there's any wrong ways to do it if you enjoy it. I'm really hoping this flavor combo works out and the amount of work we put into the details makes a difference. I wouldn't really call this a weeknight recipe because of the marinating of the eggs and the pork, but otherwise it's not really a labor-intensive recipe. It's not gonna scare you off, hopefully, like tonkotsu ramen did to me for a couple of years. I think this is pretty approachable. I'm gonna start here with the broth. Cheers. Yeah, you can probably hear it in my voice. My sinuses are a little pressured right now, so this is exactly what I need. I've never put doenjang and miso in the same recipe, but you can taste the differences between the two, but putting them together is a genius idea. And this pork, I mean, bulgogi is my favorite food, so no surprise that that hits home, but that works super well in a ramen. All right, I've never tried Mayak gyeran, but I'm really excited. I definitely can't be the first person to think of putting this in a ramen, but I think it's gonna work perfectly here. Yeah, that tastes pretty similar to a traditional ramen egg, but there's just a little bit more going on because there's more in the marinade. Crispy onions. Crispy enoki mushrooms. Incredible. I mean, I'm not trying to be whatever about this, but maybe it's just recency bias. I think this comes pretty close to the tonkotsu ramen that I made last year. Specifically the one I made because I'm not an expert, so I didn't make it the best. But this is even on par with some of the professional versions that I've had, but just at a fraction of the time and labor it takes to make those. I really just think you need an aromatic and protein base, and then you can build your stock off of that. It doesn't take a lot to make a flavorful broth, especially if you have doenjang and miso lying around. And after that, you just get to be creative with the toppings that you add to it. I really hope someone tries this or tries some portion of it or just gets some ideas from this video. I'm really proud of this one. I was struggling yesterday to figure out what I wanted to film for this next video, and I don't really know, this kind of just came to me in a fever dream, and I'm really glad it did. But that's gonna be all for me today. Thank you all for watching, be blessed, and I'll see you next time. New Orleans really needs some more good ramen spots.